Hey guys, tonight we are not sailing stormy seas or exploring ancient ruins. No. Tonight you are stepping into a quiet workshop in the heart of Renaissance Florence, sometime in the late 15th or early 16th century. It's early morning. The city is just beginning to stir outside your window, but inside, the air is still, carrying the faint smell of paper and pigments. You can hear the distant tolling of a bell, the first calls of street vendors setting up their stalls, maybe the clatter of a cart on the cobblestones below. You are a map colorist, a skilled artisan about to bring a black and white world to vibrant life with your brush. This isn't a job for the impatient or the heavy-handed. It's meticulous, quiet, focused work that helped shape how people saw the world. You probably won't survive this history lesson without feeling a deep appreciation for a steady hand and maybe the urge to color something very neatly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in the comments below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake as the first light begins to grace the Florentine rooftops. Your small living space is likely connected to your workshop. The separation between work and life is often minimal for artisans. Stepping into the workshop proper, the air is cooler than it will be later in the day, carrying the distinct clean smell of paper or parchment, and the fainter, earthy or sometimes slightly chemical scents of the various pigments you work with. Dust motes dance in the weak shafts of light filtering through the unadorned windows. Outside, the city is gradually coming to life. You might hear the splashing of water from a nearby fountain, the murmur of early risers, the distant clatter from the Mercato Centrale as vendors prepare. Florence in the Renaissance was a vibrant, often noisy place, a hub of commerce, art, and intellectual life. Florence was a major center of Renaissance art, craft, and commerce, home to countless skilled artisans, workshops, and businesses, trades like printing, manuscript illumination, and map-making flourished here, placing map coloring within a rich tradition of artistic and technical skill. This is our mainstream historical fact, grounding your quiet work in a city bursting with creativity and economic activity. Your workshop is your sanctuary of focus. It's probably a relatively simple room, perhaps on an upper floor to maximize the precious natural light from the windows, essential for seeing true colors. A sturdy wooden table is the central feature, often angled slightly towards the light. Shelves line the walls, holding jars of powdered pigments, bottles of binders, pots of water, and stacks of completed or waiting maps. Your tools are laid out. A collection of fine brushes made from animal hair, perhaps quills or pens for adding lines, small palettes or shells for mixing colors. Everything is arranged for efficiency and the delicate work ahead. Sensory details the clean, subtle smell of paper or vellum, the smooth feel of a well-used brush handle, the quiet sounds of your own movements in the still room, the cool air from the open window. You are a map colorist. Your job is specific, taking maps that have been printed often from wood blocks or copper plates or sometimes still hand-drawn in black ink, and bringing them to life with color. This isn't the work of the cartographer who painstakingly gathered the geographic information and drew the initial lines, nor necessarily the printer who ran the press. You are the artist who applies the final, vibrant layer, transforming a technical drawing into a beautiful, informative, and often expensive object. It requires patience, a steady hand, and a good eye for color. The nature of your work is quiet, focused, and meticulous. While the bustling city outside your window is engaged in loud commerce, political intrigue, and grand artistic endeavors, your world is one of fine lines, subtle washes, and concentrated effort. It's a contrast that isn't lost on you. You might be coloring a map of the newly explored coast of a distant continent, a place of imagined monsters and real dangers, while your workshop is a picture of peaceful, domestic routine. Joke number 1. Yes, I spend my days painting terrifying sea monsters onto maps. Exciting, right? My biggest daily challenge is not spilling the blue pigment. Your early morning routine is designed to prepare you for this delicate work. You open the shutters wide, letting in as much natural light as possible. The quality of light changes throughout the day and affects how colors appear. You sweep and tidy your workspace, clearing away any dust or debris that could ruin a fresh map. You check your stock of water, ensuring it's clean for mixing pigments and washing brushes. You arrange your brushes and pens just so, ready for use. A quirky tidbit about the workshop setup might involve your lighting. While natural light is best, on cloudy days or for working late, you'd rely on oil lamps. But working with oil lamps around paper, pigments, and potentially flammable binders required care. Some colorists might have had specific setups with reflective surfaces to maximize the light from a single lamp, or used lamps with guards to prevent accidental fires. Imagine carefully shading a coastline by the flickering light of an oil lamp, acutely aware of the fire risk. There's joke number 2. Attempting fine detail by lamplight is easy. You only occasionally set things on fire? Mostly. The role of a map colorist, and how specialized it was, is something that historians still discuss. Historians still debate the precise level of specialization of map colorists in Renaissance workshops, questioning whether it was a distinct full-time profession in itself, or primarily a skill practiced by broader artisans like manuscript illuminators, painters, or even the printers themselves as one part of their overall work. Were you only coloring maps, or did you also paint miniatures, decorate manuscripts, or help with other workshop tasks? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, understanding exactly where your specific craft fit into the artistic and commercial landscape of Florence, regardless of whether it was your sole occupation or one skill among several. The work demanded a specific temperament, patience, precision, and the ability to focus for long periods. It was a quiet contribution to the vibrant world of the Renaissance, transforming functional objects into works of art and tools of knowledge. Joke number 3. You carefully arrange your brushes, each one a tiny tool to conquer a vast blank world. Or, just color in France. You stand ready at your workbench, the city waking up outside, the quiet anticipation filling your workshop. The ink outlines on a waiting map represent uncharted territories and known lands, all waiting for the touch of your brush to bring them to colorful existence. The quiet life of the map colorist is about to begin for another day. You've prepared your workspace, arranged your tools just so, and the first light of Florence fills your workshop, chasing away the shadows. The quiet anticipation builds. The air smells clean and ready. Now, it's time for the raw material of your craft to arrive. The canvas for your colors, the blank map. A messenger arrives, perhaps from the map maker's studio across town, or from a printer's shop near the Arno. They might carry the map rolled up, tied with a ribbon, or perhaps folded carefully. You greet them, take the map, and bring it to your workbench. Unrolling it is a careful process. These are often large sheets of paper, or for higher quality commissions, expensive vellum-treated animal skin. As you unroll it, you hear the faint, crisp sound of the material straightening out, revealing the world in monochrome. Sensory details the rustle and faint snap of the map unrolling, the clean smell of paper or the slightly richer, smoother scent of vellum, the visual contrast of black ink on the white or cream surface. What lies before you is the cartographer's work, complete in its geographical detail but lacking the vibrancy that will bring it truly to life. It's an outline of the world, or a significant part of it, rendered in black ink. Coastlines are sharp lines. Rivers snake across continents. Mountain ranges are depicted with hachures or small drawn peaks. Cities are marked with dots or tiny symbols. Borders between known or claimed territories might be lightly indicated. Names are carefully lettered across the land and sea. All the information is there, precisely drawn. But it feels unadorned, like a musical score waiting for the instruments to play. The quality of the outline varies depending on how the map was produced. Some might be meticulously hand-drawn originals, commissioned by a wealthy patron. More and more during the Renaissance, however, maps were being produced using printing techniques. Renaissance maps were increasingly produced using printing techniques, initially woodcuts and later, more detailed and finer copperplate engravings, allowing for wider and more consistent distribution of geographical knowledge than hand-drawn copies. However, the subsequent coloring was almost always done by hand by skilled artisans like yourself. This is our mainstream historical fact, highlighting the blend of printing and manual craft in map making. A woodcut map outline might be bolder, perhaps a little less detailed, while a copperplate engraving offers incredibly fine lines and intricate detail, capturing nuances that only a small, sharp tool can make. You might receive different types of maps, grand world maps, depicting the extent of known geography, constantly being updated as the age of exploration brought back new information. Regional maps focusing on Europe, the Mediterranean, or the expanding awareness of Asia and Africa. Increasingly, detailed maps of newly encountered lands across the Atlantic, or perhaps specific city plans, showing the intricate layout of Florence itself, or other important urban centers. Each type presents its own challenges and opportunities for color. Looking closely at the blank outline, you might notice small imperfections, perhaps a line that didn't print quite clearly, a name that's slightly smudged, or a fine detail that requires careful attention when coloring to ensure it doesn't disappear. These are the little challenges that separate a truly skilled colorist from a novice. You learn to interpret the lines and anticipate where the color should go, sometimes even slightly correcting the original outline with a fine pen before you begin painting. A quirky tidbit about these blank maps involves the decorative elements. Even on the uncolored outline, you'd often find fantastic elements included by the cartographer, waiting for color, elaborate cartouches, decorative title blocks, compass roses with intricate points, and especially, the depictions of sea monsters or mythical creatures in the oceans were often drawn in outline, ready for you to bring their fearsome or fanciful forms to life with vibrant pigments. Imagine looking at a beautifully drawn sea serpent outlined in the middle of the Atlantic, just waiting for you to decide if it will be green and scaly or blue and finned. There's joke number one. Ah yes, a blank map. My canvas for global accuracy, and adding terrifying but scientifically questionable squids. The uncolored map, with its black ink lines on a pale background, feels like a world in potential. It's a flat surface that represents immense depths and distances, high mountains and low valleys, bustling cities and vast, empty spaces. It's the distillation of countless hours of exploration, surveying, calculation, and drawing, all delivered to your workbench, waiting for the final touch that will make it complete. Beautiful and functional for navigation or display, historians debate the typical level of accuracy and consistency of printing on Renaissance maps. Given the technology, how sharp and reliable were the printed lines, especially on large maps? How much creative license or corrective work was actually required of the colorist to account for printing errors? Areas left intentionally vague by the cartographer, or simply limitations in the original outline. This is our open scholarly debate phrase, understanding how much the colorist's hand shaped the final geographic representation beyond just adding color. Unrolling that fresh map, feeling the texture of the material, and seeing the stark black and white lines spread out before you is a familiar, comforting start to the process. It's the quiet moment before the colors appear, a deep breath before you dive into bringing this two-dimensional world to life. Joke number two. You gently flatten a curl in the vellum. Hold still. Little map. You're about to get a serious upgrade. It's a reminder of the collaboration involved in map making, from the explorer to the cartographer, the printer, and finally, you, the colorist. Joke number three. You look at a particularly blank section of an unknown continent. So much white space. So many decisions to make. This is either a cartographer's nightmare or a colorist's dream. The blank map awaits, ready for the transformation that only your skill can provide. You've unrolled the blank map, that intricate black and white world waiting patiently on your workbench. The fine ink lines represent coasts, rivers, and cities, but it's color that will breathe life into this geographical skeleton. But before you can lift a brush to vellum, you need the colors themselves. And in Renaissance Florence, getting those vibrant hues wasn't as simple as opening a tube from the art supply store. It was a process of transforming raw materials from the earth, plants, and even insects into fine powders. Pigments didn't arrive ready-made and mixed. They came in various forms: lumps of rock, dried plant matter, small cakes of processed material, or coarse powders. Your first task is often to take these raw or semi-processed materials and prepare them for painting. This process is called grinding, and it requires time, effort, and patience. You use a mortar and pestle. For coarser pigments, these might be made of stone, but for the finer, more precious colors, you might use polished glass or agate mortars and pestles, designed to grind the material down to the absolute finest powder without introducing impurities or grit. You place a small amount of the raw material into the mortar and begin the slow, rhythmic process of grinding and crushing it with the pestle. Sensory details the scraping or grating sound as the pestle moves against the mortar, varying depending on the hardness of the material, the feel of the stone or glass in your hand, the visual transformation of the material from lumps or crystals into a fine, soft powder. The goal is consistency and fineness. If the pigment isn't ground finely enough, it will be gritty when mixed with its binder and applied with a brush, resulting in uneven color and a rough texture on the map. Different pigments require different amounts of grinding. Some earth pigments break down relatively easily, while hard minerals demand significant effort and time to get them just right. It's a repetitive task, often done in the quiet concentration of your workshop. The sources of your colors are diverse and fascinating. Many come from minerals found in the earth. Ochres, common earth pigments, provide a range of yellows, reds, and browns, dug from the ground and simply washed and dried before grinding. Malachite, a copper mineral, gives you beautiful greens. Cinnabar, a mercury sulfide mineral, provides a vibrant red vermilion, though it is heavy and its dust can be toxic if not handled carefully. Lead compounds were used for brilliant whites and bright yellows like lead white and lead tin yellow, but these too were hazardous to work with. Sensory details the distinct earthy smell of ochres, the slightly metallic tang of some mineral pigments, the fine dust that might float up as you grind. Blues were particularly valuable. Azurite, a copper mineral, provided a blue, but the most prized blue came from lapis lazuli, a semi-precious stone imported from distant mines, notably in Afghanistan. Grinding lapis lazuli and processing it to create the pigment known as ultramarine was an incredibly laborious and complex process, often involving multiple stages of grinding and washing to separate the vibrant blue lazurite from impurities. This pigment was intensely blue and light-fast, but prohibitively expensive, often costing more than gold. Renaissance artists and colorists across Europe often prepared their own pigments from raw materials like minerals such as expensive lapis lazuli for blue, or common earth ochres for yellows and reds, plants like indigo, and insects. A fundamental, time-consuming, and often physically demanding process requiring specific tools, knowledge, and patience to achieve the desired fineness and purity. This is our mainstream historical fact, showcasing the effort behind the colors. Plant sources provided other colors. Indigo, derived from plants, gave a deep blue, though different in quality from ultramarine. Saffron, the spice, provided a rich yellow, often used as a stain or wash rather than a true pigment in some contexts. Various roots, berries, and flowers could be processed to yield greens, yellows, and reds, though these were sometimes less permanent than mineral pigments. Sensory details the strong, sometimes bitter smell of plant-based pigments. Reds could also come from insects. Kermes, derived from scale insects, provided a rich red dye and pigment historically used in Europe. Later, cochineal, derived from Mexican scale insects, became a more intense and widely used red pigment after the age of exploration brought it to Europe. But even before then, reds from sources like madder root or kermes were valuable. Our quirky tidbit focuses on the sheer effort behind the most expensive colors. Preparing ultramarine from lapis lazuli was so complex and costly that it was often reserved for the most important commissions or the most significant parts of a painting or map. The process involved grinding the stone, mixing it with wax, resin, and oil, wrapping this mixture in a cloth, and kneading it repeatedly in a weak alkali solution. The blue pigment would slowly separate into the solution, leaving impurities behind. It was a true labor of love, or perhaps just necessity, for the most brilliant blue. Imagine spending hours kneading a ball of dark blue goo just to get a tiny amount of vibrant pigment. There's joke number one. Just making some blue paint only requires backbreaking labor and occasionally dissolving expensive rock in weird mixtures. Simple stuff. The grinding process itself requires focus. Too fast. And you risk scattering the precious powder. Not long enough. And the pigment is gritty. You develop a feel for it. The right pressure, the right rhythm. It's a repetitive task, but essential. Joke number two. You listen to the steady grinding sound. The sound of global exploration. One tiny particle at a time. Historians debate the extent to which Renaissance map colorists and other artisans consistently prepared all their own pigments from raw materials versus purchasing some pre-ground pigments from apothecaries or specialized suppliers speciali who also sold artists' supplies. Was it more common to buy raw minerals and grind them yourself, especially the expensive ones to ensure quality? Or was buying pre-ground pigments a common practice, at least for certain colors, to save time and effort? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, understanding the economics and practicality of pigment sourcing for the working artisan. Having a well-stocked array of finely ground pigments laid out in small shells or pots on your workbench, ready to be mixed with their binders, is a satisfying sight. These powders, derived from grinding Earth's colors, are the raw potential waiting to transform the blank map into a vibrant representation of the world. Joke number three. You look at your collection of colorful powders. So many colors. So much world to paint. Better get grinding. It's a fundamental step, connecting you to the ancient practices of preparing colors, a quiet, dusty prelude to the meticulous painting process. You have your palette of vibrant, finely ground powders, painstakingly prepared from minerals, plants, and other sources. They sit there, dry and still in their shells or pots, holding the potential for brilliant blues, fiery reds, lush greens, and sunny yellows. But they are just dust, loose particles of color. To turn them into paint, into something you can actually apply to the map with a brush and have it stick to the paper or vellum, they need a binder. The binder is the medium that holds the pigment particles together and adheres them to the surface of the map. For the kind of work you do, applying washes and fine details to maps and illuminations, the binders are typically water-soluble. The most common would be gum arabic, a resin collected from acacia trees, dissolved in water. Other binders included animal glues made by boiling down animal skins, bones, or parchment scraps, like parchment size or hide glue. While tempera painting, using egg yolk as a binder, was common for panel painting, for the transparent washes and fine brushwork on maps. Gum arabic or thin animal glues were preferred. Renaissance map colorists and illuminators mixed their carefully ground powdered pigments with water-soluble binders, most commonly gum arabic or various animal glues, to create paints suitable for applying both broad washes and fine details to paper and vellum surfaces. This is our mainstream historical fact, detailing the crucial role of the binder. The process of mixing is delicate and requires skill. You take a small amount of the powdered pigment and place it on your palette. Palettes could be anything from small shells like mussels or oysters to simple ceramic dishes or even polished stones. Then you carefully add the liquid binder, usually diluted with water, drop by drop or in small amounts. Using a palette knife, a small, flexible metal or bone spatula, or the back of your brush. You begin to mix the powder and the liquid together, working it until it forms a smooth, consistent paint. Sensory details, the soft scrape of the palette knife against the palette, the feel of the smooth, creamy paint forming as you mix. The distinct smell of the binder. Gum arabic has a slightly sweet, pleasant scent, while animal glues might have a faint, more animalistic odor. The skill lies in getting the consistency just right. Too little binder, and the paint will be chalky. Rub off easily, and the pigment particles might clump together. Too much binder, and the paint can become shiny. Brittle when dry, especially glues, or difficult to apply smoothly in washes, sometimes causing cracking or flaking later. Different pigments also behave differently. Some absorb the binder readily, others resist it and require more mixing. You learn by experience, by feel, knowing just how much binder each color needs to achieve the perfect texture for painting. It's a bit like baking, the exact ratio matters, but sometimes you go by feel. Joke number 1. Mixing ultramarine is easy. Just add binder until it's the color of the deepest ocean and the consistency of, well, very expensive blue liquid. Perfect. As you mix, you witness a small transformation. The dry, dusty powder, which might have looked relatively dull, changes as it becomes wet paint. The color often deepens, becoming richer and more vibrant as the binder surrounds the pigment particles and allows light to interact with them differently. That brilliant blue lapis lazuli dust, once mixed, becomes the intense, glowing ultramarine paint that justifies its immense cost. You mix only small amounts at a time. Paint made with natural binders and pigments doesn't keep indefinitely, and some colors can react or change if left mixed for too long. You mix fresh batches as needed for each coloring session, ensuring the colors are as vibrant and pure as possible. A quirky tidbit about binders and additives involves the historical use of substances beyond the standard gums and glues. Some recipes or traditions mention adding small amounts of honey or sugar to the paint mixture. These additives, particularly honey, could help keep the paint moist on the palette longer and improve its flow from the brush, resulting in smoother washes and fewer brushstrokes visible. Imagine adding a tiny drop of honey from your morning tea to your blue paint to make the oceans flow more smoothly. There's joke number 2. Just a little bit of honey in the green paint makes the forest extra sweet or just helps it apply better. Probably the latter. Getting the consistency right for the specific application is crucial. For large washes of color, like filling in continents or oceans, you need a thinner mixture that flows easily and applies smoothly without leaving streaks or tide marks. For fine details, like city dots or mountain outlines, you need a slightly thicker, more controlled paint. You learn to adjust the ratio of water to binder and pigment for each task. Historians debate the level of standardization or personal practice in Renaissance pigment mixing. Were there widely accepted recipes or formulas for mixing different pigments with binders? Perhaps taught through apprenticeships, or was it largely based on individual colorists' experience, feel, and preference, leading to variations in paint quality and appearance even when using the same pigments? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, understanding how much science versus individual artistry went into preparing the paints. Having your palette filled with freshly mixed colors, ready to use, is a moment of quiet satisfaction. The vibrant hues sit waiting, liquid potential on the palette, promising to transform the blank map into a visual feast. Joke number 3. You admire the colors. Look at all these beautiful paints now. If only I can remember where Portugal is. Maganasai. It's a step that requires precision and knowledge. Turning the raw powders of the earth into the liquid medium of your art, preparing for the delicate process of application. You have your palette of vibrant, freshly mixed paints, sitting in their shells or dishes, ready to flow. The finely ground pigments are now bound and ready to adhere to the map, transformed from dusty powders into smooth, colorful liquids. But between the paint and the paper, you need the instruments of your craft, the extensions of your hand and eye, the brushes and pens. These tools might seem simple, but their quality and condition are vital to your ability to apply color with precision and control. Your collection of brushes is likely varied, each one suited to a specific task. Brushes were traditionally made from fine animal hairs, carefully gathered and inserted into a handle. Common sources for the hair included squirrel tail, sable, or ox ear hair, chosen for its softness, flexibility, and ability to hold and release paint smoothly. These bundles of hair were often inserted into handles made from bird quills, sturdy feathers, commonly from geese or swans, cut and shaped to hold the bristles, or sometimes simple wooden sticks. Sensory details the feel of a smooth, cool quill handle or the slightly warmer texture of wood. The incredible softness and fine point of good animal hair bristles. The way a dry brush feels light in your hand. You likely have a range of sizes, large, round brushes for applying broad washes of color, like filling in the vast expanse of an ocean or a large continent. Medium-sized brushes for filling in smaller countries or regions, or for thicker lines. And, crucially, very fine-pointed brushes for adding tiny details. Small islands, city dots, delicate lines for rivers or borders, or decorative elements. The shape and point of the brush are paramount. A good brush should hold a fair amount of paint and come to a sharp point when wet, allowing for both broad strokes and fine details with the same tool. Depending on the pressure applied, pens are also essential, though they are used primarily for line work, drawing very fine borders, adding place names, or perhaps adding outlines to decorative elements after the color has been applied. The most common was the quill pen, made from a bird feather again. Goose or swan was popular for its strength and flexibility, with the tip carefully cut and sharpened to create a nib. Reed pens, made from hollow reeds, were also used, producing a bolder line. Maintaining a sharp point on a quill pen requires constant attention and skill, trimming it with a sharp knife. Renaissance map colorists and illuminators relied on brushes made from fine animal hairs, inserted into quill barrels or simple wooden handles, and sharpened quill pens as their primary tools for applying paints and inks with the precision required for detailed map work. This is our mainstream historical fact, highlighting the tools of your trade. Selecting the right tool for the job is part of the art. You look at the area you need to color on the map. Is it a large country needing a smooth wash of green? You reach for a medium or large round brush. Is it a delicate coastline or a winding river that needs a fine line of blue? You choose a small, sharp-pointed brush, or perhaps a pen loaded with thinned paint. Are you adding tiny dots for cities? A very fine brush with a good point is required. The size and shape of the tool dictate the type of mark you can make. You become intimately familiar with your tools, their individual quirks. This brush holds the perfect amount of paint for a smooth wash. That pen's nib always gives you the sharpest line. Caring for them is vital. Brushes must be cleaned thoroughly after use to prevent pigment from drying in the bristles and ruining the point. Quills must be sharpened regularly. These tools are not easily disposable. They are investments in your craft, requiring diligent maintenance. A quirky tidbit about brushes involves the sometimes unusual materials used for handles or simply preference. While quills and wood were standard, some artists reportedly experimented with handles made of bone or ivory for certain brushes, perhaps for balance or simply aesthetics. More fundamentally, finding a source for good quality animal hair and the skill required to prepare the bristles and set them correctly in the handle to form a perfect point was a craft in itself. A poorly made brush with stray hairs or a blunt point could easily ruin delicate work. Imagine relying on something as simple as carefully selected hairs and a bird feather to create incredibly detailed maps. There's joke number one. This brush, yes, made from the finest squirrel tail hair. He wasn't using it anymore. Using your brushes and pens is a tactile experience. You dip the brush into the mixed paint on your palette, feeling the bristles absorb the liquid. You bring the loaded brush to the map, feeling the texture of the paper or vellum under the delicate touch of the hairs. You guide the brush with your fingers, controlling the flow of paint, the width of the line. With a pen, you feel the slight scratch of the nib against the surface as the ink or thinned paint is applied. Sensory details the sound of a brush swishing in paint, the almost silent whisper of a fine brush tip or pen nib on the paper, sciano vellum, the feel of controlling the paint flow. Historians debate the extent to which Renaissance colorists consistently crafted all their own brushes and pens from raw materials versus purchasing them from specialist suppliers. Were there specific workshops that focused solely on making high-quality artist tools that colorists would buy from? Or was the ability to select the raw feather and carve your own perfect quill? Or gather and set animal hairs into a handle, a standard part of the colorist's own skill set passed down through apprenticeship? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, understanding where the tool-making craft ended and the coloring craft began. Having your collection of brushes and pens neatly arranged on your workbench, points sharp, bristles clean, ready to be dipped into the waiting colors, is a symbol of readiness. They are your connection to the map, the instruments that translate the liquid hues from your palette into the geographical forms and decorative elements of the printed outline. Joke number 2. You pick up a particularly fine-pointed brush. All right, little guy. Time to make this tiny river look like a significant body of water. They require care and a steady hand, just like your entire craft. Joke number 3. You sharpen a quill pen. This little feather is about to annotate the globe. Don't mess it up, feather. These simple tools, mastered through practice, are essential to bringing the blank map to life. You have your tools ready, the fine brushes and sharp pens laid out, and your palette is filled with vibrant, freshly mixed paints. The powder's finally transformed into smooth, colorful liquids. The blank map awaits on your workbench. Now, the transformation begins, not with tiny, intricate details, but with bringing the biggest shapes, the vast landmasses and oceans, to life, washing the broad areas with color. This is often the first major step in the coloring process. You select a larger brush, perhaps one with a round, full belly capable of holding a good amount of thinned paint. You dip it into your palette, perhaps a diluted green mixed just for this purpose, or a pale blue for the sea. The technique here is applying a wash, using paint that is relatively thin, more like a watercolor than a thick paste, to cover a wide area smoothly and evenly. You bring the loaded brush to the map, perhaps starting with a familiar continent like Europe. You touch the wet brush to the paper or vellum within the ink outline and guide the paint across the surface. You see the color spread and soak into the material. The goal is to cover the entire area defined by the outline, a country, a continent, an island, with a consistent layer of color, avoiding streaks or areas where the paint pools unevenly. This requires a steady hand and confident strokes, working relatively quickly before the edges of the wash can start to dry and create unwanted lines. Sensory details the feel of the wet brush gliding smoothly across the surface, the faint whispery sound it makes, the visual of the color blooming and spreading on the paper, cache, vellum, the slight buckling or rippling of the material as it absorbs the moisture. The color choices for these broad washes followed certain conventions, though they could also be influenced by client preference or the colorist's own artistic choices. Known, fertile landmasses like Europe or parts of Asia were often colored in various shades of green. Deserts or less explored regions might be depicted in yellows or browns. Sometimes, different countries within a continent would be given slightly different shades of the same color, or entirely different colors to help distinguish political boundaries. Applying a smooth, even wash without leaving visible brushstrokes or tide marks. Darker lines left where a wash dries unevenly. Often at the edges is a key skill that comes with practice. You need to keep a wet edge, constantly bringing fresh paint into the drying areas. It's a balance between applying enough paint to cover the area and not so much that it becomes uncontrollable or risks bleeding into adjacent areas through the paper. Map colorists in the Renaissance applied thin, diluted washes of water-based paints, typically mixed with gum arabic or animal glues, to the large areas of maps such as continents, countries, and oceans as a foundational step in the coloring process, using broad brushes to achieve smooth and even coverage across the surface. This is our mainstream historical fact, detailing the technique for laying down base colors. As the wash dries, the color often changes, becoming slightly lighter or sometimes shifting in hue compared to how it looked when wet. You learn to anticipate these changes, mixing your paint slightly darker or in a particular tone, knowing how they will appear once dry. The paper or vellum, wet from the wash, might buckle slightly, especially if it's a large area, adding to the textured look of the finished map once it flattens out again. A quirky tidbit about these washes involves unusual color choices for large features you might occasionally see on historical maps that weren't strictly geographically accurate. Sometimes, mountains might be depicted with washes of pink or purple, or entire regions given colors that didn't seem to correspond to their actual terrain or vegetation, perhaps for aesthetic reasons or simply the availability of a particular pigment. Imagine looking at a map with bright pink Alps. There's joke number one. Ah, yes, the legendary pink mountains of... Wait, where is this did I spill? Or a wash might go slightly wrong, leaving an obvious streak or a muddy patch, a frustrating imperfection in the otherwise meticulous work. The choice of colors for landmasses wasn't always arbitrary, but the degree of standardization is debated. Historians debate the degree of standardization and symbolic meaning behind the color choices used for landmasses and regions on Renaissance maps. Were specific colors consistently used to represent types of terrain, g. green for forests, yellow for deserts across different map makers? Or were they primarily used to differentiate political entities, with the color of a country changing depending on who commissioned the map or who controlled the territory? Was there a widely understood color code, or was it more left to the colorist's discretion or the mapmaker's instructions? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, understanding if your color choices were following strict rules or primarily artistic whims. Applying these broad washes is a fundamental skill, requiring patience and control. It's the step that moves the map from a black and white drawing to a colorful representation, laying the foundation for the finer details to come. Joke number two. You finish washing a large continent green. There looks much more habitable now. It's a satisfying process, seeing the ink lines come alive as color flows across the surface, transforming the blank space into a world taking shape. Joke number three. You carefully avoid dripping blue paint onto a green continent. Must keep oceans separate. The map is starting to gain its vibrancy. One smooth wash at a time, the broad washes are applied. The continents and oceans or significant seas now have their base colors spreading across the paper or vellum. The material might still feel slightly damp in places, the colors drying to their final hue. As the surface becomes ready, not too wet but still receptive to more paint, you move from the broad strokes that define land and sea to the finer details that differentiate the world within those land masses carefully coloring the land borders. While the initial washes give a sense of the physical world, the lines you are about to apply represent the political world, the divisions between different countries, kingdoms, empires, or regions. These borders were often indicated by the map maker with light ink lines or dashed marks on the blank outline, and your job is to make them visually distinct using color. You select a finer brush now, one with a good, sharp point, or perhaps a sharpened quill pen, depending on the desired thickness and style of the line. You dip it into a different color, often a red, a yellow, or another hue that contrasts well with the land wash it will sit upon. Reds made from cinnabar or madder were popular choices, as were yellows from saffron or lead tin yellow. The color is usually mixed to a slightly thicker consistency than the washes, allowing for a clean, solid line that won't spread too much. Then, holding your breath perhaps, you bring the brush or pen tip to the map and begin to carefully trace the existing ink line that marks a border. This requires immense concentration and a very steady hand. You follow the intricate contours of the border, moving slowly and deliberately. The line you draw must be clean, consistent in width, and precisely follow the cartographer's outline. One wobble, one slip of the hand, and the border between France and Spain, or the edge of a newly claimed territory might become artistically ambiguous. Sensory details the feel of the fine brush or pen moving smoothly or with a slight drag across the surface, the intense focus in your eyes, the slight tension in your hand and arm as you maintain control, the visual of the thin, vibrant colored line appearing precisely on the map. You might color the borders of one country in red, the next in yellow, then perhaps blue, creating a visual patchwork that clearly delineates political control. On a map showing many different states, selecting colors that contrast well with each other and with the underlying landwash is important for clarity. The political significance of these lines isn't lost on you. These aren't just decorative flourishes, they represent claims of territory, spheres of influence, the boundaries of power. On maps of Europe, these might be well-established, recognized borders. On maps of newly explored lands, the borders might represent ambitious claims by European powers, often drawn on the map long before any physical control was established on the ground. Your colored line helps to solidify these claims visually, presenting them as established facts to the map's owner. Renaissance map colorists meticulously use distinct colored lines, typically red, yellow, or other contrasting hues applied with fine brushes or pens to delineate political boundaries between countries, kingdoms, and regions after the main geographic washes were applied, significantly enhancing the map's informational clarity and visual appeal. This is our mainstream historical fact, detailing this precise step in the process. A quirky tidbit about border coloring involves those areas where the geography or the political reality was uncertain. On maps of distant or newly explored continents, the cartographer's outline might be vague, marked with a dotted line or a tentative squiggle. As the colorist, you still had to interpret this vagueness and apply a colored line. Did you make it a solid line, implying certainty? Or did you use a dashed line, matching the outline's uncertainty? Sometimes, borders might be depicted as following geographical features that didn't quite line up, creating strange visual compromises. Imagine coloring a border that seems to jump inexplicably across a river because the original outline was based on conflicting reports. There's joke number one. Ah, yes, the infamous wobbly border of uncertainty. Just apply the red line. And maybe a little prayer that the Duke doesn't notice. The accuracy of these borders, particularly for distant lands, was often questionable and based on limited exploration and political ambitions. Historians debate the accuracy and political implications of border depictions on Renaissance maps, especially for distant or newly explored regions. How precise were these lines, meant to be in representing actual control on the ground? Did colorists sometimes have discretion to interpret vague boundary lines based on the latest, possibly conflicting information they might have heard? Or were they expected to follow the printer's outline precisely, even if it was known to be inaccurate or speculative? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, understanding the colorist's agency and the map's truthfulness regarding political divisions. Applying these border lines is a slow, meditative process, requiring intense focus. It's where the political layer is added to the physical map, transforming continents into kingdoms and adding a layer of human organization to the natural world. Joke number two. You carefully draw the border between two rival states. There, now everyone knows who owns that pixel. One slip of the hand, and Portugal might accidentally annex a piece of Spain. Joke number three. You wipe a tiny smudge of red from Italy's border. Almost gave the Pope a new neighbor he didn't want. These fine lines are crucial details, requiring a steady hand and a clear eye. You've brought the land to life with washes of green, yellow, and brown, meticulously outlining the political divisions with lines of contrasting color. But the world isn't just land. It's surrounded, connected, and in the age of exploration, increasingly defined by vast stretches of water, the oceans and seas. Bringing these watery realms to life with color is the next significant step in your process. The oceans on a Renaissance map represent both formidable barriers and the pathways to new discoveries. The highways of global trade and exploration, Coloring them requires large quantities of blue pigment, applied with care to convey not just their presence, but perhaps something of their nature. Typically, oceans and seas were colored using blue pigments, but rarely was it just a single flat wash of blue across the entire map. Colorists would use varying shades of blue or employ techniques to create subtle variations within the vast expanse of water. You might start with a lighter blue wash near the coastlines and transition to deeper, richer blues in the open ocean, creating a sense of depth, even if purely symbolic rather than strictly cartographic. Or you might apply washes in different directions or layer them subtly to suggest movement, currents, or waves. The type of blue used often depended on the quality and cost of the commission. Cheaper maps might use blues made from azurite or indigo, which could be somewhat variable in shade and less vibrant. More expensive maps, especially those for wealthy patrons, would proudly feature the brilliant, intense blue of ultramarine, made from ground lapis lazuli. Using ultramarine for the vast stretches of the ocean was a clear visual statement of the map's high quality and expense. You were literally painting the sea with a pigment that cost more than gold. Imagine mixing a large batch of that precious blue and applying it across the map, feeling the weight of its value. Sensory details the visual intensity of the blue pigment, especially ultramarine as it spreads, the feel of the wet brush moving across the large surface area, the subtle shift in color as the wash dries. Applying these large blue washes requires similar skill to coloring the landmasses, perhaps even more so due to the sheer size of the areas involved. You need to mix enough paint for a consistent batch. Apply it smoothly and evenly over vast expanses without letting edges dry prematurely and create streaks. And perhaps subtly vary the shade to suggest depth or add visual interest. It's a meditative process, covering the intricate outlines of the coastlines and islands with flowing blue, bringing the watery world into existence. Oceans and seas on Renaissance maps were typically colored using various blue pigments, often with the application of washes in differing shades or techniques to depict perceived depth movement, or simply add visual richness and complexity, highlighting the importance of these waterways for the era's expanding knowledge and travel. This is our mainstream historical fact, describing the approach to coloring the water. Within these blue expanses, the mapmaker has often drawn other elements that you must carefully color around. Islands, of course, but also ships sailing the seas, compass roses indicating direction, and perhaps most wonderfully, the fantastical sea monsters and mythical creatures that populated the oceans of the Renaissance imagination. You paint the blue wash up to the very edge of these ink outlines, leaving them blank for later attention. Joke number 1. All right, painting the vast, empty ocean, carefully avoiding the giant squid outline. Don't want to accidentally make him blend in. A quirky tidbit about coloring water involves some older mapping traditions or specific artistic choices. Before blue became the standard, some older maps depicted seas in green, or even left them uncolored. You might occasionally see a map that uses an unusual shade or a very specific technique to depict currents or whirlpools with color, perhaps relying on anecdotal reports from sailors. Imagine encountering a map where the Pacific is colored in swirling patterns of green and purple. There's joke number 2. This map shows the Atlantic in a lovely shade of turquoise, and the Indian Ocean appears to be depicted entirely in swirling glitter. Must be a luxury addition. Historians debate the cartographic versus artistic intent behind the use of varying blue shades and techniques for oceans on Renaissance maps. Was the intention to genuinely represent perceived depths based on limited knowledge or convention, aiming for a form of visual cartographic information? Or did the variations primarily serve an aesthetic purpose, simply making the large blue areas more visually appealing and less monotonous? Showcasing the colorist's skill. This is our open scholarly debate phrase, understanding if the variations in blue were about geography or just artistry. Applying the blue washes is a significant step, bringing another vast, crucial element of the world map to life. It defines the boundaries of the continents and islands more sharply and sets the stage for the maritime details that will populate these watery spaces. Joke number 3. You finish a large section of the Atlantic. There now. The explorers know where the water is. Hopefully, they also know where the land is. It's a process that requires patience and the ability to work on a large scale while maintaining control, transforming blank space into the azure pathways of the world. You've colored the vast stretches of land and sea, laying down the foundational washes of green, yellow, brown, and blue, and carefully drawing the political borders that divide the continents. The map is now a colorful world of broad shapes and lines, visually distinct and politically divided. But the work is far from complete. Now you zoom in, leaving the broad strokes behind, focusing on the finer geographic details that truly populate these regions, adding rivers, lakes, mountains, and most notably, cities. This is where the smaller tools in your collection come into their own. You set aside the larger brushes used for washes and pick up one of your fine-pointed brushes, perhaps with just a few delicate hairs, or even a very finely sharpened quill pen capable of delivering a thin, controlled line of paint or ink. Sensory details the feel of the tiny, delicate brush handle, the sharp point of the brush or pen, the intense, close visual focus required for this work. You turn your attention to the rivers, following the intricate ink lines that snake across the landmasses. Rivers and lakes were typically colored blue, connecting them visually to the larger bodies of water. With your fine brush loaded with blue paint, often a slightly more intense blue than the ocean wash, you carefully trace the river's course, from its source in the mountains down to the sea or a lake. The key is to keep the line smooth, consistent, and within the original outline, ensuring it doesn't wobble or bleed into the surrounding land color. You might use a slightly thicker line for larger rivers and a thinner one for smaller streams, adding a sense of scale. Sensory details the visual of the blue line appearing precisely on the map, the feeling of controlling the tiny flow of paint. Mountains, often depicted with rows of drawn peaks or systems of hachures. Short lines indicating slope also require attention. You might apply a thin wash of brown or gray over the hachures to give them dimension, or perhaps add small touches of color to the peaks. Browns, grays, or sometimes even symbolic colors if the commission called for it, like the occasional pink or purple we mentioned earlier. The goal is to make these raised features stand out visually from the flatter surrounding terrain. But perhaps the most numerous and detailed features you color are the cities. On the blank outline, cities are often marked by simple dots, small circles, or sometimes tiny, stylized symbols representing buildings or fortifications. Your task is to give these important points of human habitation a visual presence. You select a vibrant color that will stand out against the land color, often red cinnabar or madder red, gold, or even a strong black. With your finest pointed brush, you carefully add a precise dot or fill in the tiny symbol for each city. Think about the sheer number of cities on a map of Europe, or a detailed regional map. Each one requires a steady hand and a precise application of color. A dot too large, a symbol sloppily filled in, and the meticulous work of the cartographer is undermined. This is tedious work, requiring prolonged concentration, moving from one tiny point to the next, across entire continents. Joke number 1. Okay, that's Paris done. Only 4,000 more cities in Europe to go. My eye is only twitching slightly. Renaissance map colorists diligently added fine geographical details such as colored rivers, lakes, mountain symbols, and prominent dots or tiny symbols for cities to maps using small, fine brushes, significantly enhancing the geographical information conveyed and adding visual richness to the map after the main washes were applied. This is our mainstream historical fact, focusing on this level of detail. A quirky tidbit about city depictions involves unusual or significant cities. On some maps, particularly important cities like Florence, Rome, or Venice might be depicted with a slightly larger dot, a more elaborate symbol, or even a tiny bird's eye view rendering instead of just a simple dot. As the colorist, you follow these distinctions, perhaps using a touch of gold for a particularly important capital city. Imagine putting a tiny dot of gold on the spot that represents your own city. Florence. There's joke number 2, a gold dot for Florence. Of course, only the best for our fair city, and maybe a slightly larger gold dot for my street. Sometimes the placement of cities or rivers might be inaccurate, based on the original cartographer's information, but you simply color what is there. Historians debate the typical accuracy of inland geographic details like rivers, lakes, and cities on Renaissance maps, especially for distant regions. Given the limitations of surveying technology, how reliable were the locations and courses of rivers or the positions of cities? Did colorists have any additional geographical knowledge beyond the ink outline they were given? Perhaps from travelers' reports, or did they simply follow and enhance the drawn lines and symbols provided by the cartographer, even if they suspected inaccuracies? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, questioning how much the colorist's work reflected actual geographical knowledge versus simply making the existing drawing look good and informative. Applying these fine details transforms the map from broad areas into a world populated with features. Rivers become blue veins across the land. Mountains rise in color, and cities appear as vibrant points of human activity. Joke number 3. You carefully add a dot for a remote city in Asia. There. Now that tiny dot represents thousands of people, markets and stories, or maybe just a really important rock. The mapmaker was a bit vague. It's a meticulous process, requiring patience and extreme precision, making the map both more geographically informative and visually engaging. You've added the vital inland details, the blue arteries of rivers, the colorful dots marking cities, the shaded peaks of mountains. The map is now geographically rich, showing the known world with increasing precision. But the vast blue expanses of the ocean still await further attention, offering space not just for necessary navigational lines, but for imagination and artistry. This is where you bring the seas to life with ships and, perhaps most famously, those fantastical sea monsters. These marine elements were not strictly cartographic in function. They didn't help a sailor navigate. Their purpose was primarily decorative, serving to fill the large, often empty spaces of the oceans, adding visual interest and artistic flair to the map. They also reflected the era's fascination with the sea, its vastness, its power, and the unknown wonders and dangers it might hold, particularly in distant, newly explored waters. You carefully select a fine brush and begin coloring the ships that the mapmaker has drawn, sailing across the seas. These are often detailed ink outlines of Renaissance sailing vessels, caravels, carracks, galleons, depicted with their sails full, plowing through the waves. You paint their hulls with browns or blacks, add touches of white or cream for the sails, color the rigging with fine lines, and maybe add flags or symbols to their masts. Each ship becomes a tiny vessel of exploration or trade, adding a sense of movement and human activity to the oceans. Sensory details the careful control needed to color tiny details like rigging, the visual of the small ship coming to life on the blue background. And then, the sea monsters. This is where the map colorist could really let their imagination, or the prevailing myths and travelers' tales, run wild. Mapmakers often drew the outlines of these creatures in the unexplored or more dangerous-looking parts of the ocean. You follow these outlines, bringing these fantastical beings to vibrant life with your colors. You might paint a giant serpent coiling in the Atlantic, a multi-headed beast rising from the waves near an unknown island, strange fish with tusks or wings, or human-like figures emerging from the deep. You use a range of colors for the monsters, greens and blues for scaly bodies, reds for gaping mouths or fierce eyes, yellows for horns or spines. You add texture with your brushwork, suggesting scales, fins, or shaggy manes. Each monster is a miniature work of art, adding a layer of wonder, fear, and the unknown to the map. Sensory details, the visual pop of bright, imaginative colors on the fantastical creatures, the imagined sounds of roars or splashes, the feel of carefully tracing the intricate outlines of scales or fins. Other decorative elements often populated the seas. Elaborate compass roses, showing the points of the compass, might be placed prominently in the ocean areas you'll color these outlines. Maybe add gold later. Cartouches containing the map's title or dedication were frequently placed here. Surrounded by decorative flourishes, navigational lines crisscross the oceans, connecting ports, and you might color these subtly or highlight them. These decorative elements added a layer of artistry and narrative to the map. They weren't just technical charts, they were also visually appealing objects meant to be displayed, reflecting the patron's taste and knowledge or perceived knowledge of the world. The ship spoke of exploration and trade, the monsters of the mysteries and dangers of the vast, unknown seas. Renaissance map colorists frequently added decorative elements to the oceans on maps, such as detailed depictions of sailing ships and fantastical sea monsters, which served both to fill the large empty spaces visually and add artistic appeal. Reflecting the era's fascination with the sea, its roots, and its perceived unknowns. This is our mainstream historical fact, confirming the common practice and its purpose. A quirky tidbit about sea monsters involves the sheer variety and bizarreness of the creatures depicted on historical maps. Some were clearly inspired by classical myths, others perhaps by exaggerated tales from sailors, and some seem purely products of the artist's imagination. You might encounter outlines of creatures you've never seen before described. A fish with a human face, a coiled serpent large enough to wrap around an island, a beast with multiple eyes. Imagine receiving a map where the cartographer has drawn something particularly strange, and you have to decide how best to bring its monstrous form to life with your colors. There's joke number one. Right, this sea monster outline, does he get polka dots or stripes? The cartographer's notes are frustratingly vague on monstrous patterns. Historians debate the cartographic versus symbolic or cultural meaning behind the depictions of sea monsters on Renaissance maps. Were they included purely as artistic convention and decoration to make the map more appealing? Or did they sometimes reflect genuine beliefs or travelers' tales about perceived dangers and unknown creatures lurking in distant, unexplored waters, acting as visual warnings as much as decoration? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, questioning if the monsters were just art or if they held deeper meaning for the people of the time. Coloring the ships and sea monsters is often a favorite part of the process for a colorist, allowing for creativity within the structured task of coloring. It brings a dynamic, sometimes wild energy to the otherwise static map. Joke number 2. You carefully paint teeth onto a grinning sea serpent. There now, he looks sufficiently terrifying for the uncharted waters off the coast of somewhere. It's a reminder that even as geographical knowledge grew, the sense of wonder and the unknown remained strong. Reflected in the artistry of the map? Joke number 3. You finish coloring a ship. All right, little ship, off you go. Try not to get eaten by the giant, multicolored squid I just painted. The land is colored and bordered. The oceans are blue and populated with ships and monsters. Rivers and cities mark the interior. The map is vibrant, geographically rich, and visually engaging. But to truly elevate it, to make it a statement of wealth, importance, and artistry, there's one final, precious touch to add: the application of gold. Gold was frequently used to add highlights and decorative elements to Renaissance maps, transforming them from merely informative charts into luxurious objects. This wasn't typically done with gold leaf, which was more common for large areas in manuscript illumination or panel painting. Instead, map colorists often used shell gold or powdered gold. This was real gold metal that had been ground down to an incredibly fine powder, mixed with a water-soluble binder like gum arabic, similar to your other paints, and often stored in small shells, hence the name shell gold or tiny pots. This material was immensely valuable. The cost of a map would increase significantly if gold was used, and the amount of gold applied was a clear indicator of the patron's wealth and the importance of the commission. Using shell gold wasn't just about making the map prettier, it was about making it richer, literally and figuratively. Sensory details, the visual shimmer and reflection of the gold as it catches the light. The feel of the fine brush loaded with the slightly heavier, gritty gold paint. The sense of handling something precious. Applying shell gold requires precision and care, not just because the material is expensive, but because it's applied to specific, often intricate areas. You wet the gold powder with a tiny amount of water on your palette, mixing it carefully with the binder to form a paint-like consistency, though it remains distinctly granular and shimmering. You select one of your finest brushes, one you trust implicitly for detailed work. Then, you carefully apply the gold paint to the areas defined by the ink outline that you've left uncolored, or designated for gilding. The most common places for gold include the points and decorative elements of compass roses, the elaborate borders and lettering of cartouches, those decorative title boxes, scales of miles, and sometimes borders around the entire map. You might also add tiny touches of gold to highlight city symbols, decorative flourishes on ships or sea monsters, or even add lines of gold along important borders or coastlines. Gold, often in the form of shell gold, finely powdered real gold mixed with a binder, was frequently applied by hand to Renaissance maps by colorists to highlight important decorative elements like compass roses, cartouches, and borders, adding a layer of luxury, visual prominence, and indicating the map's high status and value. This is our mainstream historical fact, detailing the use of this precious material. The process is slow and deliberate. You need to apply the gold neatly, keeping strictly within the lines, and ensure an even coat so the shimmer is consistent. Every tiny drop of gold paint wasted feels like a small fortune lost. Joke number 1. Just applying a little bit of gold here. Try not to sneeze, or breathe too heavily, or exist. Pice. The visual effect is stunning. The dull paper or colored surface comes alive with the shimmering, metallic gleam of real gold, catching the light and drawing the eye to important decorative elements. A quirky tidbit about gold application involves unusual or unexpected placements you might find on some maps. While compass roses and cartouches were standard, some colorists or patrons might request gold be applied in more unusual spots, perhaps outlining distant, mysterious islands in gold, adding gold scales or eyes to sea monsters, or using gold for the symbols of specific, important cities as we hinted at earlier. Imagine coloring a fearsome sea serpent and giving it glittering gold eyes. There's joke number 2. Right, now Mr. Sea Monster gets his gold contact lenses. Very fashionable for the deep. These unusual gold placements add an extra layer of personality and expense to the map. Historians debate the symbolic versus purely decorative and status functions of gold application on Renaissance maps. Did the amount of gold used or its specific placement on the map carry any subtle symbolic meaning beyond simply indicating the patron's wealth? Did gold specifically represent divinity, perfection, or the preciousness of knowledge about those areas? Or was it primarily a straightforward indicator of how much the patron was willing to pay for a luxurious object designed to impress? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, understanding the deeper meaning behind the sparkle. Applying the shell gold is often the final, most nerve-wracking step in the coloring process, requiring ultimate precision with the most expensive material. But the result is undeniable. The map is transformed into a truly prized object, shimmering with wealth and artistry. Joke number 3. You step back and admire a newly gilded compass rose. Magnificent, now everyone will know which way is north. In style, it adds a layer of richness and highlights the elements that were considered most important or decorative, completing the map's journey from blank outline to finished work of art and information. You've completed the meticulous task of adding the shimmering shell gold, those tiny glints of precious metal that highlight key elements and signal the map's value. Stepping back from the detail, you take a moment to absorb the map as a whole, now nearly complete in its vibrant colors and glittering accents. And as you do, you are enveloped once more by the unique atmosphere of your workshop, the controlled environment where all this detailed transformation takes place. Your workshop is, by necessity, a place of focused concentration. While the vibrant energy of Renaissance Florence pulses just outside your walls, the chatter of merchants, the calls of artisans, the sounds of daily life echoing from the street below. Inside your studio, the atmosphere is one of relative quiet and intense focus. It's a bubble of calm in a busy city. Sensory details the distant, muffled sounds of the city outside, the stillness and quietness of the air inside, the feeling of the space being designed for deliberate, steady work. The sites within your workshop are centered around your craft. Your workbench is the heart of the room, covered with the tools of your trade jars of colorful pigment powders, shells or ceramic dishes holding freshly mixed paints, pots of water for cleaning brushes, the brushes and pens themselves laid out neatly, and, of course, the map you are currently working on, spread out carefully. On shelves around the room, you might see stacks of blank maps waiting their turn, completed maps drying, bottles of binders, and perhaps reference materials, sketches, color charts, or even other finished maps. The quality of light is a constant visual element, changing throughout the day. Sensory details the visual intensity of the vibrant pigments in their raw or mixed form, the way the light hits the drying colors on the map, the subtle texture of the paper or vellum visible up close. The sounds of your workshop are quiet and rhythmic. The sounds of meticulous manual work. You hear the soft scratch or whisper of a fine brush tip moving across the paper or vellum, the gentle swishing sound as you rinse a brush in your water pot, the quiet scrape or murmur as you mix a new batch of paint on your palette, the almost inaudible sound of your own careful breathing as you lean close to add a tiny detail, perhaps the distant chatter of birds from outside the window, or the occasional muffled sound filtering up from the street below, a bell, a shout, a cart rumbling past. It's a soundscape defined by quiet concentration. Sensory details the distinct sounds of your tools on the map surface, the subtle sounds of mixing paint, the quiet background hum of the city outside. Natural light is paramount for your work. As we discussed, you rely on the light from your windows to see and mix colors accurately. The position of your workbench is likely carefully chosen to get the best and most consistent light throughout the day. You track the passage of time not just by the city bells, but by the way the light in your workshop changes. Brighter and cooler in the morning, warmer and more golden in the afternoon, fading as evening approaches, signaling it might be time to switch to less demanding tasks, or light a lamp. Modern aside, we take electric light for granted, allowing us to work consistently regardless of the time of day or weather. You are dependent on the sun's schedule. Your work is often solitary, or perhaps shared with just one or two apprentices if you have them. It's a craft that requires intense individual focus for long periods. Unlike the bustling communal spaces of some other trades, the map colorist studio is a place of quiet, individual application and precision. A quirky tidbit about the workshop environment might involve the need to manage dust. Despite cleaning, fine dust is always present, and in a workshop dealing with wet paints and delicate surfaces, a stray dust mote could ruin hours of work. Colorists would develop strategies, working in specific areas, covering maps when not actively being worked on, meticulous cleaning routines, perhaps even dampening the air slightly carefully to keep dust down. Imagine the constant battle against tiny airborne particles. There's joke number one. My workshop is a realm of vibrant color and profound geographical knowledge. Also, dust. So much dust. Renaissance artisan workshops, including those dedicated to specialized crafts like map making and coloring, were typically characterized by their reliance on natural light, the focused nature of the manual work performed, and a relatively quiet atmosphere compared to the bustling and often noisy city streets outside. This is our mainstream historical fact, describing the typical environment of your trade. Historians debate the degree of interaction and knowledge exchange that occurred between different artisan workshops in Renaissance Florence. While artists in different fields certainly influenced each other, how connected were specialized craftspeople like map colorists to the broader network of printers, cartographers, other illuminators, or even scientists who were providing the geographical information? Was the workshop primarily an isolated bubble of focused work, or were there frequent visits, collaborations, and sharing of techniques and information between related trades? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, questioning how much of a solitary endeavor your craft truly was within the vibrant Florentine ecosystem. Experiencing the workshop's sights and sounds is experiencing the core of your craft. It's the controlled, focused space where the transformation of a blank map into a vibrant, informative work of art happens, defined by the quality of light, the quiet sounds of meticulous work, and the presence of the tools and materials of your trade. Joke number 2, you carefully rinse a brush. Just the sound of skill and cleaning. It's a place of quiet dedication in a loud world. Joke number 3, you step back to assess your work. The quiet satisfaction of making the world look slightly more colorful and less dusty. Your workshop is a place of focused work, where light, skill, and color come together to bring maps to life, transforming blank outlines into vibrant representations of the world. But this quiet, meticulous craft doesn't exist in a vacuum, purely for your own satisfaction. Your work is driven by demand, by the people who desire these beautiful, informative charts, your patrons. The clients for high-quality, hand-colored Renaissance maps were almost exclusively the wealthy elite. These weren't items purchased by the common person. Your patrons were likely wealthy merchants grown rich from trade, perhaps even the very Silk Road commerce we discussed in a previous life. Noblemen, royalty, or institutions like governments or wealthy families. They had the means to afford not just the cost of the printed or hand-drawn map outline, but the significant additional expense of having it meticulously colored and perhaps embellished with gold. Why did these wealthy individuals and institutions want such maps? The reasons were varied. While maps served a practical function for navigation, planning voyages, or understanding geography, for many wealthy patrons, the colored map was also a powerful symbol of status, wealth, knowledge, and worldly engagement. A large, beautifully colored map displayed prominently in your study or reception hall was a statement. It showed you were informed about the world, interested in exploration and commerce, and wealthy enough to own such a luxurious object. It was a piece of art that also conveyed intellectual curiosity and power. Modern aside, think of it like collecting rare globes today, or commissioning a massive custom-made world map for your corporate headquarters. It's about more than just utility. Your interaction with these patrons could range from receiving a commission through a third party like a map maker or printer, to direct meetings to discuss their specific requirements. A patron might have particular requests wanting their family crest incorporated into a decorative cartouche, asking for specific regions to be emphasized or colored in certain ways, requesting a particularly high level of detail or luxury, dictating the amount of gold to be used. For instance, your skill in translating their desires, whether practical or purely aesthetic, into the finished map was part of the service you provided. Coloring a map by hand transformed it from a relatively standardized print into a unique, personalized object. While multiple copies of a black and white print might exist, the hand coloring made each one subtly different. The choice of specific hues, the style of applying washes and details, the amount and placement of gold all contributed to making a colored map a bespoke item, significantly more expensive than its uncolored counterpart. The act of coloring added immense value, turning ink on paper into a prized possession. The finished map, delivered to a wealthy patron, was a fascinating blend of science and art. It was a representation of the best geographical knowledge available at the time, though often incomplete or inaccurate. As we've touched on, combined with your artistic skill in bringing that information to vibrant, visually appealing life, it was a tool for understanding the world, presented as a beautiful object. Sensory details the visual appeal of the completed, colored map unrolled in a well-lit room. The feeling of crisp, high-quality paper or vellum, the glint of gold catching the light. High-quality, hand-colored Renaissance maps were expensive luxury items primarily commissioned and owned by wealthy patrons including merchants, nobles, and rulers, who valued them not only as tools for understanding geography, but significantly as symbols of their status, wealth, knowledge of the world, and cultural sophistication. This is our mainstream historical fact, establishing the clientele and the status of your work. A quirky tidbit about commissions might involve unusual requests from patrons related to the content of the map. Given the incomplete nature of geographical knowledge, especially regarding distant lands, some patrons might have insisted on the prominent depiction of mythical islands or legendary kingdoms based on old texts or rumors, or perhaps wanted unexplored coastlines drawn in a way that favored their nation's territorial claims. Imagine a wealthy merchant paying extra to have a particularly fierce-looking sea monster placed specifically near a trade route they wish to discourage rivals from using. There's joke number one. Yes, Signor Medici, I can certainly make sure the Isle of Gold Hoarding Dragons is prominently featured and appears terribly difficult to reach. Historians debate the degree of patron influence on the actual cartographic content and political messaging of the maps they commissioned. Beyond just the coloring and decoration, were map makers and colorists ever pressured by wealthy or powerful patrons to deliberately incorporate inaccuracies or biases into the map to serve political aims or personal boasts? Or was there a strong emphasis on presenting the best available geographical information, even if it was incomplete? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, questioning whether your artistic and coloring work ever veered into propaganda at the patron's behest. Delivering a finished map to a patron, seeing it unrolled in their grand home or office, is the culmination of your meticulous work. It moves from your quiet workshop into the world of power, commerce, and display. Joke number two. You see the map displayed. Look at that, my coloring work, proudly showing the world, and Signor Rossi's vast landholdings in Tuscany. It's a reminder that your craft, though focused on fine detail, played a part in the larger culture and aspirations of the Renaissance elite. Joke number three. You overhear a patron showing off your map. Yes, commissioned it myself. Cost a fortune. But look at that lovely green I chose for England. Very green. Your patrons provided the means and the motivation, transforming your skill into highly prized objects of art and knowledge. Delivering a beautifully colored map to a pleased patron is a rewarding culmination of your craft, seeing your meticulous work appreciated and displayed. But the journey from blank outline to finished masterpiece isn't always smooth, a steady progression of perfect washes and precise lines. Your work is filled with challenges, from the inherent nature of the materials you use to the ever-present possibility of making a mistake with your hand and brush. Working with natural pigments, painstakingly ground from minerals, plants, and insects, presents certain difficulties that modern artists rarely face. One is inconsistency. Different batches of the same pigment, even from the same source, might vary slightly in hue or intensity. Mixing it with the binder requires care, as some pigments absorb the liquid differently, making it hard to achieve a perfectly smooth paint every time. Some colors are naturally more granular than others, no matter how finely you grind them, making smooth washes or fine lines a challenge. Sensory details the slight grittiness of some pigments under the brush, the frustration of a color not mixing smoothly, the subtle variation in hue between two batches of paint. Another challenge with natural pigments is their light fastness, how well they hold their color over time when exposed to light. Some vibrant plant-based colors, while beautiful when first applied, might fade or change hue significantly over years or decades, especially if the map is hung on a wall in a well-lit room. Rich greens might turn brownish, some reds might darken. Mineral pigments are generally more stable, but each color has its own properties you must understand. Beyond the pigments themselves, the manual application of paint to paper or vellum on a large, detailed map is prone to errors. Your hand might wobble slightly while drawing a fine borderline, or adding a tiny city dot. A brush might catch unexpectedly on a rough patch of paper, causing a smudge. A wash might be misjudged, creating a streak or pooling unevenly in one area. A drop of paint might fall onto a completed section where it doesn't belong. Sensory details the visual of an unwanted smudge appearing, the feeling of frustration as your hand slips. the concentration required to not make mistakes. Correcting mistakes on paper or vellum is incredibly difficult, often much harder than making the mistake in the first place. Unlike modern digital work with its convenient undo function, your options are limited. You can try to gently lift the wet paint with a clean brush or cloth, but this often leaves a faint stain or damages the surface of the material. For dried mistakes, you might attempt careful scraping with a sharp blade, but this inevitably thins and roughs up the paper or vellum, and it's nearly impossible to remove the color entirely without leaving a visible mark. Sometimes, the only option is to camouflage the mistake as best you can, perhaps by carefully applying layers of the surrounding color over it, hoping it won't be too noticeable. Or, for major errors on a crucial area, you might have to start the entire map over, a costly and time-consuming setback. Our quirky tidbit about tricky pigments involves certain greens. Some green pigments derived from copper compounds could be unstable and even corrosive over long periods, sometimes eating through the paper or vellum. Imagine applying a beautiful green wash to depict a forest, knowing that centuries later, that color might literally create holes in the map. Finding ways to process or mix these pigments to make them more stable was an ongoing challenge for colorists. There's joke number one. Just painting this forest, hoping it doesn't decide to spontaneously consume the rest of the map. Navigating these challenges requires patience, experience, and an almost zen-like acceptance that perfection is unattainable. You hone your skill to minimize errors, but you also learn techniques for managing and concealing the inevitable imperfections that come with hand-done work using natural materials. Joke number two. You carefully touch up a slightly wobbly borderline. They're perfectly imperfect, as my old master used to say. Or maybe he just said, fix it better. Renaissance map. Colorists faced significant challenges working with natural pigments, including their inherent inconsistency and variable light fastness, and navigating the potential for errors like smudges or uneven application, inherent in the meticulous manual painting process on paper or vellum, often requiring skills in careful correction or camouflage. This is our mainstream historical fact, detailing the practical difficulties of the craft. Historians debate the typical tolerance for minor errors and inconsistencies in Renaissance hand-colored maps. Were patrons who were paying a high price, highly demanding of flawless execution, scrutinizing every line and wash for perfection, or was a certain degree of human imperfection expected and tolerated in artisan work as a sign of it being handmade? Different from the increasing uniformity of printed elements. This is our open scholarly debate phrase, understanding patron expectations versus the reality of manual production with the materials of the time. Dealing with difficult pigments and frustrating mistakes is a daily reality of the colorist's life. It adds a layer of challenge to the quiet, focused work. But overcoming these hurdles or finding ways to make the imperfections part of the character of the map is also part of the skill. Joke number three. You managed to blend a difficult smudge. Crisis averted. The world will continue to spin, with one slightly darker patch of ocean. It reminds you that your craft is not just about applying color, it's about mastering materials and technique, even when they are sometimes uncooperative. You've navigated the challenges of inconsistent pigments and avoided mostly making unfixable mistakes. The washes are smooth and vibrant. The borders are clean and distinct. The inland details are sharp, and the gold glints just right, drawing the eye to key elements. After hours, days, perhaps even weeks of meticulous work, depending on the size and complexity of the map and the demands of the patron, the final brushstroke is applied, the final dot of color, the final touch of shimmering gold. You lean back, stretching tired shoulders, and look at the finished map. It lies before you, no longer a stark, black and white outline, but a colorful, vibrant world spread across paper or vellum. Continents glow with greens and yellows, oceans shimmer with blues and gold, cities appear as precise dots of color, rivers snake in blue veins, and fantastical sea monsters and sailing ships populate the seas. It is transformed. The finished map is a fascinating fusion of geography and art. It represents the best available geographical knowledge of the time, the painstakingly gathered information from explorers, sailors, and surveyors, translated into lines and names by the cartographer. But it is also a work of art, shaped by your skill in preparing and applying pigments, your eye for color, your steady hand in drawing fine lines and adding delicate details, and your artistic flair in bringing decorative elements like sea monsters and cartouches to life. It is more than just data on a page, it is a curated, artistic view of the world, filtered through the knowledge and aesthetic sensibilities of the Renaissance. Hand-colored Renaissance maps were highly valued objects that served as important tools for conveying geographical information, while simultaneously functioning as significant works of art. Blending scientific representation with artistic skill, meticulous craftsmanship, and decorative embellishment. This is our mainstream historical fact, capturing the dual nature of the finished product. The completed map serves multiple purposes. For navigators and merchants, it is a tool, albeit one with limitations in accuracy, to understand routes and distances. For scholars, it is a source of geographical information, a subject for study. But for many wealthy patrons, it is also a window to the world, a way to travel without leaving their study in Florence. They can trace the coastlines of newly discovered lands, follow the routes of famous explorers represented by those tiny ships you colored, and marvel at the perceived wonders and dangers of distant continents and oceans brought to life by your vibrant monsters. It's a conversation piece, a symbol of their knowledge and engagement with the expanding world. The map is also a snapshot in time. It represents geographical understanding and misunderstanding at the moment it was created and colored. As new voyages are made, new lands explored, and surveying techniques improve, the map will gradually become outdated, its coastlines corrected, its empty spaces filled in on future editions. But for now, it is a contemporary view of the world, brought to colorful life by your hand. Completing a large, complex map is a moment of quiet satisfaction. All the hours of grinding pigments, mixing colors, applying washes, drawing fine lines, and adding touches of gold culminate in this finished object. You see the result of your focused effort, a testament to your skill and patience. Sensory details the visual vibrancy of the entire map spread out, the way the gold catches the light from the window, the feel of the smooth, finished surface of the paper or vellum, a quirky tidbit about the fate of these maps. While some were used for practical purposes, many ended up displayed in wealthy homes and institutions, often mounted and perhaps even varnished, though varnishing could sometimes cause colors to yellow or darken over time. They became prized pieces of furniture and art, rather than being carried on voyages. Imagine your meticulously colored map, meant to depict the wild, unknown world, ending up hanging safely on a wall in a quiet palazzo, admired but never tested on the open sea. There's joke number one. Spent weeks making those sea monsters terrifying? Hope they're enjoying terrifying the drawing room furniture. Historians debate the interplay between the artistic elements coloring, decoration, monsters, and the perceived cartographic accuracy or authority on Renaissance maps. Were patrons primarily drawn to the artistic beauty and novelty of the decoration, perhaps accepting the geographical information with a degree of skepticism? Or did the vibrant coloring and impressive artistry somehow lend an air of greater authority or truthfulness to the geographical representation itself? How much did the artistic embellishment influence a map's reception as a reliable source of geographical information versus just a beautiful object? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, questioning how art and science were perceived to interact on these charts. The finished map is ready to leave your quiet workshop and enter the world of its patron. It carries with it the knowledge of distant lands, the aspirations of explorers, the claims of rulers, and the artistry of your hand. Joke number two. You carefully roll up the finished map. Right, world. You're ready for your close-up. It represents not just geography, but the human desire to understand, depict, and possess the world, one careful brushstroke at a time. Joke number three. You hand the map to the messenger. Try not to get this eaten by a sea monster on the way. I just finished coloring them. And now, as the finished map leaves your workshop, and our journey through the quiet life of a Renaissance map colorist comes to a close, you can feel the focus softening. The colors on your palette are settling. The smell of pigments is fading. The quiet sounds of your work are receding. You can let go of the fine details, the steady hand, the challenges of pigment and vellum. All the maps you've colored, all the worlds you've brought to life, are resting now, safe in their colors. The light in the workshop is dimming. The journey is done. The history has been explored. There are no more lines to trace tonight, no more colors to mix. Just peace, quiet, and the gentle sense of a world beautifully painted, breathing easy, letting go, drifting. Sweet dreams.